Hey guys! I've probably mentioned this before, but I am indeed an adult doll collector. If you've watched the Thrift Finds video or follow me on social media, you probably already knew that. Anyway, in this video, I want to talk about how exactly I got into doll collecting and give some tips and tricks for aspiring collectors as well. So, let's just jump straight into it. Being a fab, that's being assigned female at birth in case you don't know, I was encouraged to play with dolls from a young age. This was the 2000s after all, where gendered products still reigned supreme, especially toys. Back then, although things were starting to change, boys were expected to play with Nerf guns and Hot Wheels, and girls were expected to play with Barbies and My Little Pony. It was seen as strange and worthy of bullying if girls wanted to play with something like Beyblades, and especially if boys wanted to play with something like Bratz. Why do I bring this up? Basically, society and my parents expected me to play with dolls, and I certainly did. Dolls were always one of my favorite things to play with as a kid, and not just because I was indeed a girl. Even as a young child, I've been told I have an insane imagination, and one thing I was really good at was coming up with my own characters. I wasn't into drawing at the time due to A, not being all that interested in the arts, and B, having undiagnosed dyspraxia. Dolls allowed me to channel that creative energy into a physical medium. They also gave me something to fidget with during family outings. If I remember correctly, I started broadening my horizons as I got a bit older, with me now being interested in dolls that were a bit unusual or less popular, with Novi Stars being my personal favorite, in case you couldn't tell. I also ended up with a lot of other dolls from short-lived lines such as La-Di-Da, Cutie Pops, and even Equestria Girls. But, of course, I was growing up against my will. Dolls started being seen as childish. Now many girls my age were interested in the new boom of social media and this new tech phenomenon known as smartphones. I felt like I was being pressured by society again, but instead of being pushed to play with dolls, now it was to get rid of them. So began the purge, which in retrospect I 1000% regret. I got rid of all my childhood dolls, as well as other toys such as MLPs and plushes. Again, huge regret. I felt like I wasn't ready to, but I felt like I had no choice. I may have not played with my dolls as much as I used to, but I wanted to keep them as a display piece. This was also before doll collecting was seen as cool or mainstream, at least to me. What didn't help this mindset was that some dolls were completely off limits. My at-the-time stepmother, aka the really bad one, forbid me and my at-the-time stepsister from having Monster High dolls, as she was one of those people who believed they were a bad influence. That's a dumb argument, but that is indeed a topic for another day. This gave me a bad view on dolls for a while, but I still secretly love them. Then, eventually, I took the plunge. What kept me from being a collector in the past was mostly due to people being judgmental. I mean, we've all seen the toxicity of social media, and that if you like anything that is even slightly socially unacceptable, to a degree, I am not trying to defend pedos, you'll get blasted with every name in the book. Of course, being an angsty and self-conscious teen, I was worried of what others would think of me if they found out this high schooler still played with toys. But once 2020 came around, I bit the bullet. I was at my local Target with my mom, and I decided to wander down the Barbie aisle, and found a Barbie in a wheelchair with probably the most amount of articulation I've seen on a doll. For any doll collectors watching, it was Fashionistas 132 with the made-to-move body. I decided to pick her up. She wasn't super expensive, and I planned on using her more as a model than anything. It felt weird, if I'm being honest. I was 18 or 19 at the time, just graduated from high school, walking down an aisle of toys designed and marketed towards little girls. I was expecting to get some glares and maybe even some Karen comments, but no, nobody cared. Initially, that was the only doll I intended on buying, but something just kind of hit me, especially as I was walking down the new Rainbow High section. I don't know, something just got under my skin and I decided to buy another doll. This one being my Series 1 Skylar Bradshaw. And I just bought another, and another, and another. It became a full-fledged hobby in a matter of a few months. And the more I went down those doll aisles, the less weird I felt. Eventually, browsing the aisles felt no different than browsing a GameStop or Michael's or other hobby-esque stores. No one really cared that a now 20-something-year-old is buying a children's toy. Nobody even cared back then. I even started checking out other stores such as Ollie's and even thrift stores. Something about buying dolls now feels good. About 4 years in, my collection has grown to about 31, not including a styling head and figures. Not too bad for someone who was extremely self-conscious originally. Now, I'm much more comfortable with my hobby and can even make videos about my collection. Kinda like this one. It took some time for me to get over myself, but I must say, I'm pretty content with my collection so far, and I even have some Monster High dolls. Now that you know my cool fucking backstory, I want to give some advice to new and aspiring collectors. My first tip is that if you are doll hunting on a budget or looking for dolls that have been recently discontinued, your best bet is what I call overstock stores, but I think they're formerly called outlet stores or dead stock stores. These are stores such as Ollie's, Marshall's, and TJ Maxx. These stores typically get inventory from big box retailers such as Target and Amazon that said retailers can't sell. Many discontinued doll lines end up there before being formally phased out, and I've certainly gotten my fair share from these stores. These dolls also tend to be very inexpensive. Like for example, I managed to get 2 Rainbow High dolls for about 15 USD. That is under 10 USD than they usually retail for, especially since one of them was Kia Hart, who originally retailed for about 40 USD. Total steal, even if one of them did eventually lose their head. The big issue with shopping at these overstock retailers is that it's primarily luck-based. Since the stock is a lot more unpredictable, you're not guaranteed to find something you really want. For example, I had shopped at Ollie's recently, and their doll selection is pretty dead. The ones I did find I either already had or wasn't all that interested in. This isn't meant to discourage anyone, just keep in mind that it is indeed a bit of a gamble. Tip number 2 is that if you're interested in one-of-a-kind doll creating, doll restoration, or vintage dolls, thrift stores and yard sales are great for that. People often get rid of old dolls that either they or their children had, so you can find all kinds of dolls there, especially vintage and even porcelain. Thrift stores and yard sales tend to be great options for OOAK artists and people wanting to practice restoration, as these dolls are sold for very cheap and more often than not come in pretty iffy condition. One of my scores from a thrift store came in the form of a late 80s Barbie. She was in pristine condition, just needing a bit of conditioner for her hair. Just like with overstock stores, thrift stores and yard sales tend to be a bit of a gamble, and even more so than overstock stores. You never know what you'll find, and even if you do find something, chances are the doll will not have their original outfit, little to no accessories, and may even be in rough condition. This isn't always the case, just don't expect new in-box dolls. Tip number 3 is to always be wary when buying online. I tend to avoid buying dolls online, but if you do choose to purchase one over the internet, just be careful and practice good internet safety and common sense. Always buy from a reputable site such as eBay or Mercari. There's lots of smaller sites out there that tend to be scams, so if you're unsure of the site, do your research first, and if you're still unsure, avoid. Always check user reviews as well. Keep in mind that scammers can still be found on sites like Walmart.com or Amazon, so I suggest sorting by most recent if possible rather than most helpful, as these sellers can still fudge the reviews. You should always check the price of dolls that you plan on buying as well. Many people will sell dolls from a beloved franchise for way more than they're worth. I see this most often with Monster High dolls. Many G1 Monster High dolls tend to be sold for way more than they're actually worth, with the price of some common dolls being in the hundreds. This is why I have a hard time trusting any listing that uses words like rare or vintage, as these are just buzzwords that are used to justify the insane price. Tip number 4 is that if you're interested in hair play, be sure to pay attention to what your doll's hair is, as each hair type requires different care. There are 3 main types of materials used for doll hair. The first is nylon. Nylon is super silky and shiny and tends to be of very good quality. Rainbow High dolls tend to have nylon hair. Nylon tends to be super durable, but is notoriously difficult to shape, so if you want to do something such as curling a doll's hair, nylon tends to not be a good option. The second, and most common, is saran. Yes, the same material used in plastic wrap. Saran tends to not be as smooth as nylon, but still has a semi-nice smooth texture. Some describe saran as sticky, but it really depends on the quality used, as cheap saran does feel pretty sticky. Saran tends to be pretty versatile, which makes it popular for styling, and its durability is somewhere in the middle. The third, and definitely least, is polypropylene, often shortened to just poly. Poly is the best for making textured hair, which is why it's often used in dolls of color. It's also the cheapest out of the 3. The problem with poly is it tends to be the lowest quality of the 3, with fraying and knotting being expected. G3 Claudine tends to be an infamous example of poly hair. Tip number 5 is that if you are unsure if you truly want a doll, think about it for a bit. Walk around the store, go home, sleep on it. If you truly do want them, you can always go back, and if they're not there, just wait for a restock or try a different store. Try to avoid impulse buying as much as possible. That's how you end up with dolls you'll regret. And my final tip is if you feel self-conscious and are afraid of what other people will think, don't worry. Most people don't care. I was in the same boat as well, but the more I went down the toy aisles, the more I realized that people didn't give a shit about why I was there. Doll collecting has hit the mainstream somewhat, and adult collectors are more vocal now than ever. I also realized that most people who are in these stores only care about themselves and maybe their kids if they're with them. The clerk at the front doesn't care what you buy, they only care about getting paid. That's it. Of course, the feelings are valid. Society demonized people who enjoy kids stuff for so long, so it feels wrong to buy dolls. But if society can make adults having Legos cool, then why not do the same thing for dolls? Here's another little golden rule for you. Just because something is marketed towards kids doesn't mean it's only for kids. I think Bluey is a prime example of that. Plus, companies don't care who buys their stuff, just so long as they get that sweet money. Hell, companies like Mattel even have their own website dedicated to selling dolls to adult collectors. If that's not a sign on how far things have come, then I don't know what is. Mattel Creation still kinda sucks though. And if it makes you feel better to connect with other collectors, I suggest groups such as r/dolls on Reddit. Just be warned, it is social media, and some people don't understand how not to be toxic. There are also YouTubers such as Darling Dolls and My Froggy Stuff who make all kinds of doll and toy videos. And I can guarantee that there are at least a few Discord servers for dolls. Long story short, there's a thriving community of doll collectors online, so connecting with them can help boost your confidence. And if you do end up running into a Karen, just ignore them and go about your day. They're just trying to get under your skin to make themselves feel better. And there you have it, my brief story on how I started collecting dolls and some advice for newbies to the collecting space. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Peace, love, and RoxD, and hopefully I'll see you guys all next week. Bye!